Thank you for joining us for Finding Influencers and Measuring Impact in the AI Era, made possible by LTK. I'm Minda Smiley, and I'm a senior analyst at eMarketer. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to be digging into how brands are rising to the challenge of finding the right influencers and creators for campaigns. Joining me are Nija J. Aziz, Global Social Media Lead at Uber in New York City, and Rodney Mason, Head of Marketing and Brand Partnerships at LTK in Dallas. Before we begin, let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in throughout the session. We may get to a few of them at the end of our conversation, but our MCs, Jeremy and Sarah, will return later on and take your questions. So let's get started. Great to see you, Nine Rod. Let's go ahead and dive in. There have been some major changes happening within the social landscape this year. Already. There's a lot of uncertainty around TikTok right now, and Meta made waves last month when it ended its fact-checking program. So from your perspectives, if and how are these shifts impacting how brands go about finding and working with creators? Let's start with you, Rod.
Yeah, so we have a thing at LTK called the LTK Law, and that states that at least every 3 years, there's going to be a dynamic shift in all things creator, mainly in the social sphere. So TikTok disrupted, and then, are they going to turn it on or off? There's a lot of shifting there, like you talked about. But creators are really resilient. They understand that because they've been through so many dynamics, and especially at LTK, but I believe across creators, creators are on at least 3 platforms, and they're using social as just one of their recruitment tools. They live in blogospheres. They've got chat groups. At LTK, they have their own personal stores. So they're always driving their customers to that central place that's typically outside of the social sphere, and that's more of just attracting followers. So I would say whatever happens, creators continue to grow, and they're very resilient.
What about you, Nye?
Yeah, I mean, on my end, I would say I'm pretty old school, not to date myself, but I'm very manual when it comes to my search in terms of the different creators, we partner with for both Uber and Uber Eats. So for me, what that looks like essentially is I'm deep diving into the niche communities. I'm poking around the forums, the comment sections. If there's a tag, I'm following that tag to the next tag, just really zeroing in on organic engagement. And then the result for me has always been finding these creators who have truly built these loyal platform agnostic communities. At the end of the day, I want creators on my roster with communities that will follow them wherever they go. So not just someone who's popping maybe on TikTok and less so on Reels, but I want to work with creators who can hold court regardless of these different shifts. And I say in order to do that, brands and marketers kind of have to get their hands dirty and get in the weeds.
Yeah. And what you're both talking about, I think, really speaks to this idea of the professionalization of the creator economy that my colleague Jasmine referenced earlier. And one element of that involves creators breaking out of the confines of social media and not being tied to one specific platform and really trying to diversify their revenue streams. We're seeing them move into CTV, create their own merchandise and newsletters and more. So I'm curious, how is this broader shift in diversification affecting how brands partner with influencers? Now, I would love to know how Uber is navigating this.
No, of course. I mean, I actually welcome it. At the end of the day, creators are more than just these online personalities, right? They're real people and they have passions and businesses, projects, ventures, et cetera. So if you're a creator with, different streams of revenue coming in, I see it more so as an opportunity to meet communities where they are. I'm chronically online, and I think marketers, we want to have communities that are equally chronically online, but that's just not the reality. So if there are more streams, then I see that as more chances for impact. And I think a good case study of that is our sustainability work with Lauren Bash. She's a climate activist as well as a content creator. And when I found Lauren, I really wanted to work with her more holistically and just avoid the usual one-off social posts. So actually went into a year-long partnership with her. So she created Reels, she created TikTok videos, but I also incorporated her in our Go Get Zero planning. So Go Get Zero is our sustainability product event. So I worked with Lauren to create this sustainability guide to LA, and it lived on Instagram Reels, but we also created another iteration specifically for her blog. So the people who are deeply invested in Lauren and her environmental work, enough to read the blog and subscribe to the blog, could also tap into Uber's more sustainable efforts. And then I also pushed for her to be on the ground for Go Get Zero last year, which was in London. And I wanted her to be an event correspondent for social. Now, the calendars didn't necessarily align, but it just gives a broader scope of the different types of, ways I try to partner with content creators and really tap into their different revenue streams outside of just, the one-off posts across social.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really great example of like what this trend actually looks like in real life and how it does, maybe take marketers out of this like, laser focused on just these social platforms and sometimes even one platform in particular. And Rod, I know you're coming at it from a little bit more of the social commerce perspective, but I'd love to hear what you're hearing from marketers in terms of this broader trend towards diversification.
Yeah, so we hear from our clients, but we also just conducted a study with Northwestern University. We actually did it at the end of 2024, and we spoke to 185 CMOs and really got deep into what their goals are in life and in business. And the number one goal they had was growing their audience above anything else, above sales or whatever. And yes, they want to drive sales, but they need to grow their audience because what's going on in social, it's hard to keep an audience because it's becoming linear, almost like linear TV. So that in mind, we asked them who's now working with creators. In the old days, creator was kind of with the social team and with PR and affiliate. Now the number one group in all departments working with creator is media. Number two is branding. And they're looking at creator across all forms of communication. And we're seeing that with our clients, whether it's in retail media networks, it's UGC, user generated content, living on the site because that's more believable than reviews. It's in CTV and regular television. You're going to see it during the Super Bowl and all things digital. And the reason is a lot of times, everything that we've seen when you test creator creative, typically it's going to beat regular branded creative because it's just more believable. And we do a lot of consumer studies. Everybody else has seen this, but consumers trust creators more than ads. So as a marketer, you're going to want the most believable way to serve that up. And now you're really starting to see this explosion. In fact, in creator, when we asked them what's the number one area of investment growth in 2025, there was a tie. It was connected TV and it was creator. Connected TV is dollars flowing out of linear TV, so not a lot of new dollars. It's just kind of a migration, but influencer or creator is pulling from all different departments.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it really, speaks to your earlier point of like the landscape is always evolving and changing, and so creators have to be prepared for that. And it makes sense that audience is at the core. So let's pivot to AI. It's obviously been a huge topic over the past few years. We've seen social platforms and agencies roll out lots of AI-powered offerings to help both brands and creators. But I think a lot of marketers are still sort of fuzzy on to what extent they really should be embracing AI when it comes to their work with creators. So now I would love to get your perspective on how Uber is approaching AI within this space. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Generally, I do think AI can be helpful for marketers, especially when we talk about building better briefs for creators. But I also think it could be a good way to kind of jumpstart ideation with creators, especially if the campaign has really targeted messaging. So in Uber's use case, I used AI to help drum up conspiracy theories around football and food for a partnership with a webcomic series called Flork of Cows. I'm not sure how many people are familiar, but it's super internet-y, super niche, and it's based on this sock puppet named Albert. But I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't begin with. But I used AI essentially to help me get into the mindset of one, so that I can build out these concepts that I then shared with Brian, who owns Flork of Cows. And then he used them to help create these funny comics about why football was created, essentially to get you to order food or eat more food. We're talking about Uber Eats at the end of the day. So partnered with him and we created these 5 comics that were super funny around this, sock puppet Albert and just, ordering food during game time. Like, is it every single time there's a timeout? That means, you open your phone and order Uber Eats. And these are all concepts that we were able to build together through AI. We had 5 comics and we hit over 1.3 million impressions, nearly 700,000 total engagements. And ultimately, for me, I just thought it was a really great breadcrumbing tactic ahead of our Super Bowl rollout, which still, leans into this conspiracy theory around football and food.
Yeah, exactly. And what about you, Rod?
First of all, I want to say that was really fun. I love what you guys do. There's multiple ways to think about this. Everybody kind of thinks about, going to Chat GPT and typing something in and getting something creative, or, there's other platforms out there. But really, the way we think about it is data. Data is what drives AI. So the more data you have, the more power you have. You've seen the social platforms kind of use that and turn that into just a scroll bar for people to watch over and over again the thing that they just watched that they know will keep them sticky. But the way we think about it is, how do you find the absolute best creator for each message? So we can look at performance and what they've talked about before, and then do calculations based on that and identify them and help brands find better creators. Also, what is the right message? And AI is a really great tool to help a creator think about how hard their job is. They've really got to create all this content. They've got to be on multiple platforms. Take a single piece of content and at least format it for all the other platforms and then propagate it for them. So it's super, super uber time saving. And then from a creative perspective, they have to be original, but there are tools like Jasper and other tools. We have tools where the creator can go in and write and it learns their voice. So it can help them be a thought starter, can also be an image generator. You can create music and video and all kinds of other things. So super excited about AI. A lot of people ask me, hey, isn't AI just going to take over? There are going to be these avatars that are replace creators. That's happened in China a little bit. It's happened in Brazil a little bit. But the way we see that, there are certain people that would follow them, but they're not typically the people that follow creators. There are people that will, more just looking for advice off the internet and search those kinds of things. Creators have a worldview, so they have this perspective, and that's how they attract and grow their audiences, and their audiences are extremely loyal to them. So that's going to be hard to replace, but AI is going to help them be more efficient and reach more audiences. It's already doing that.
Okay, that's really interesting, Rod. It almost sounds like you're saying, in terms of like the kind of the virtual influencer versus human influencer thing, it almost sounds like you're saying those are two different things in the eyes of users, and like there's not really like this as much competition there as perhaps some people think.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I would also love to get your perspective on, you talked about how Uber's using it and how you're working with creators, but I'm curious to know, obviously I think creators have mixed opinions on AI, just as anyone working a job does, in terms of, yes, it can be a really helpful tool, but it can also, I think there's a lot of fears around it as well. And so I'm wondering, like, in your work with creators, have you heard any of those fears or worries around how they're using it, or do you think they're really using it as more of a tool in their toolbox?
I would like to hope that it's more so a tool in their toolbox. But there are always conversations around authenticity. I think that's just a major concern for creators as well as brands across the board, especially going into these partnerships. But what I think is really important when working with creators from the Uber perspective or the Uber Eats perspective is that we need to take into consideration safety. Safety is critical for us. Because if an AI generated content, whether it's involving video or an image, if it exaggerates or misrepresents a ride or a delivery, then we're creating distrust. And then that becomes a real safety issue for eaters, riders, drivers, and couriers. So I think all around working with creators, we're very keen on, upholding authenticity. But then on my end, it's really, my responsibility to really push forward that we're making sure we're instilling safety no matter the content that we create.
Yeah, makes sense. And so I want to shift gears again and delve into measurement a little bit. According to eMarketer forecasts, we expect marketers in the US to spend nearly 10 billion on sponsored content from creators and influencers this year. That's a 14.2% jump year over year. And that doesn't even account for boosted content or anything outside of social media. So, this is obviously a big space. It's a growing space, which is great for creators and great for marketers who are definitely seeing success in this space. But it's also ramping up this measurement conversation. A lot of marketers just really want to know, how effective are these campaigns? How can we really get a little more granular in terms of seeing how these campaigns work? And so I'm curious, Nai, this is obviously a broad question, but to start off, how does Uber measure the success of a creator campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what that collaboration is. So if I'm working with creators solely for in-feed content, then I prioritize shareability and comments. Shareability in particular just lets me know how sticky and relevant the content is. Because at the end of the day, I want as many eyeballs on the content as possible, but I also want my content to land into group chats and private spaces, but obviously for the right reasons. And you want people to engage with that content, whether it's online or, in real life through word of mouth. So if we're hitting those marks, then I would say we found success. But I've also led campaigns where social content was integrated into the in-app experience. So through push notifications that, directly took you to maybe the Instagram or even the X post, or we've used that content within our CRM. And through those avenues, we've been able to drive real bottom line impact, which I think is really cool. And in those cases, we're considering, increases in product adoption. We're thinking about upticks in rides on Uber or orders on Uber Eats. A really good example of that is bundled orders. So ordering from multiple restaurants on Uber Eats and having it delivered by the same courier in one trip. So we were able to work with a content creator to really show use case in a really fun and engaging way. And then that content was used across all of our marketing channels when we had launched the feature. So through that, we were able to increase bundled orders by 36%. And we did that within the first 2 weeks of launch. So I think it just shows the diversity in which you can work with these different content creators, but also there are different ways to measure it depending on how you plan on using that content.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it goes back to our earlier point of like, as we see creator content kind of infiltrate all these other marketing channels, it does make the measurement bit a little bit easier in some ways. And so, Rod, what are you hearing from clients and marketers on the topic of measurement? And how is LTK helping marketers better understand and measure their creator campaigns?
Yeah, we're sort of unique because we have, on average, 40 million consumers that come to LTK. They're attracted by the creators, but then they come back to find other creators. So it's really turned into that social experience. And so we can provide a view on trends immediately. We have all that view and we can share that with clients. But we have a tool called LTK 360. It gives you a full funnel view of all the awareness, consideration, clicks, everything, sentiment that's going on with your brand. You can see the top performing creators on our leaderboards. So there's just a plethora of tools. And what we try to do is help our clients synthesize that down to, hey, this is how we need to approach this program. But I think they're relying more on creators, not just for awareness or sales, but even monitoring trends or helping set trends or create trends. And the tools are out there now, to promote LTK with our platform. We probably have one of the very best views, but there's a lot of great tools out there to provide that full perspective and really get smarter about trends.
Yeah. And I'm interested to see what you guys think of this. I forget the exact study, but I remember seeing something recently that was talking about how the majority of creators say that after a campaign ends, they actually don't really have like a debriefing with the brand, and they don't always have that like kind of full circle moment where they can kind of talk about what went well, what went wrong, what they would do differently next time. And I thought that was interesting. And I guess my question for both of you is, do you, how do you think that is an issue in terms of like, making sure that these partnerships with creators, that you are going back to them after a campaign and figuring out, what you could do differently next time or do better next time? Now I'm curious how Uber navigates this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair question. I would love to, hear from other marketers about it as well. I think from an Uber perspective, this collaboration that we have with Lauren Bash, again, the climate activist, I think lends itself really well to having this debrief and this back and forth because we had a year-long partnership. We didn't just have this one-off Instagram reel. We had a series of content that we rolled out throughout 2024. And I think having that debrief is an excellent way to share our insights with her, but also hear from her and have her tell us, what her community felt about or how her community felt about that content, how they received the sustainability messaging coming from, a more travel focused, cars on the road type of brand. So I definitely welcome it. I think it gets a little bit tricky because a lot of marketers and a lot of brands are still in this one-off kind of mindset with working with creators. I don't see too many long-term partnerships, especially on the social front. And I think if we stay in that mindset, it doesn't really allow for a debrief because everyone just kind of wants to get the measurement and then just run and go about onto the next project. But having those long-term partnerships, I think, allow for more insights that you can then incorporate into future ones.
Yeah, exactly. Rod, what do you think?
Yeah, so we've rolled out quite a few tools for creators. So we might be different, but they know where they are in the leaderboard. They know how they're performing, how they're ranking. They know market prices. And these are pretty new tools, but we've got all those out there. I would second the idea of being consistent with your creators. A lot of our large clients, they want to continuously grow the number of creators that work with them, but they continue to work with their top performers. So they don't just go for the one-offs. And what happens in an ecosphere like LTK, that enhances organic posts because creators share with creators. We have 350,000 creators. So and they'll share to help their friends out or people they like. And so you get a lot of organic going that way. And our leaderboards will even identify the ones that are organically promoting you, and then brands can come in and start promoting them. And we encourage creators to do that and show them, hey, you're coming up on the leaderboard. A brand could actually be working with you because you've been promoting them organically. So I think you're going to see the market move towards a lot more transparency there. We're already there. We kind of have to be to have the relationship we have with our creators.
Yeah, really interesting. And Nye, my next question goes back to something you were talking about earlier. This idea of shareability, I think, is super interesting. And I actually just wrote a report, shameless plug, on a topic adjacent to this around social messaging and this idea that we are seeing more social activity is happening in group chats, in DMs, and metrics like sends and shareability are becoming a lot more important for marketers. And so I'm curious, it sounds like it's definitely something you're already thinking about, but I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that a little bit in terms of how you're thinking through this change strategically.
Yeah, of course. I mean, at the end of the day, I think people want to detach themselves from social platforms, but realistically, it's so ingrained in our day to day that we just can't help it, right? But for those moments when we are able to like kind of unplug, we want the content to travel with that person, right? So it's not just like I'm scrolling aimlessly on Instagram or I'm scrolling aimlessly on TikTok and I just like this. We want someone to stop and say, hey, I know about 5 people who are really interested in this, or I know about 5 people who would laugh at this just as much as I would. And then we want to make sure we're producing that content that reminds them of their favorite people, reminds them of different, in real life moments that can then drive that connectivity even further. And then you'll have this shared experience that brings people back to Uber, brings people back to Uber Eats. So that shareability, I would say, is the most important metric for me. And I would definitely encourage more marketers to lean, in that direction versus the standard likes or even just the standard video views. You want to see how sticky that content is. And in order to see that, you need to see how far it's traveling.
Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts, Rod?
Well, we just did a consumer study. 74% of consumers said social isn't social anymore, and social is the number one thing they want from it. And what that means is what they said is, I want to be able to see and follow the people that I like and know, not have stuff fed to me. Number two reason they go to social media is for entertainment. So the scrolling still works, but for that social aspect, 50% of Gen Z and millennials said they're going other places. We know that, we see that, our creators have seen that. So we're putting tracking in every place that we can to make sure that programs are being shared. But that's why we encourage brands to focus on creators and not social platforms. Creators are all over all the social platforms, but they're also on blogs and they're on podcasts. I mean, look at what's happened to podcasts. That's like really exploded and valuation and everything else. But there's just a lot of those areas. And even if you look at like forums like Reddit, that used to be for technology engineers and gamers, influencers are in Reddit, LinkedIn, and all these places that you hadn't seen them before because they're really branching out. And so I would say, yes, go with the creator that's on all forms of media and be sure that you can track how they're sharing.
Yeah, and I'm actually writing a report on Reddit right now, so I feel validated after hearing
Yeah, if
you
you
talk
want to
about
know,
Reddit in the
if you
mix.
want to know what's
So
going on Reddit, just Google because Reddit pops
yeah,
up every single time.
yeah. Well, this is great. I have one more question for both of you, and then I think we might have a few minutes for some audience cues coming in. I know we're wrapping up, so I want to hear what your thoughts are for the year ahead. Any hot takes, any big predictions, any big changes you think we're going to see? We'll start with you, Nye.
Yeah, I'm very, very keen on seeing how broadcast channels kind of evolve. I know there are brands who use them and they tend to use them to kind of like push promos through it or exclusivities of some sort. But I kind of feel like there's this interesting use case. And I'm gonna use Gymshark as an example. Gymshark or any like the fitness clothing brands, they typically have a whole collective of creators that are called athletes, and they create content, different posts about the items that they're wearing, and so on and so forth. But these athletes also have broadcast channels, so I'm very keen to understand like how you can have these longer term relationships with a whole roster of different creators and have them lean into the broadcast channels, which has typically the most engaged, involved, and committed members of these creator communities. How can you kind of feed in messaging in that way to the most active and see what the impact is there? So I kind of want to see that evolution and see which brands kind of dive in on it and what happens.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely something I'm keeping an eye on as well. Rod?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. I don't want to say this selfishly, but you guys have said it. This is pretty much the year of creator, and I think it's only going to grow more. If you think of like sports television, Abercrombie decides because of Taylor Swift, who's sort of a creator, let's do a line of women's NFL wear because everybody on social media is following her and everything going on there. And then they come to us and they're like, hey, how could you help us here? And we're like, well, we have NFL wives and girlfriends, and let's just have them talk about your products because they really use them. And so you're going to see more of this integration of all the media come together. And I think AI is going to be a big component of that as well, just from the tracking and looking at a campaign holistically. So it's not just a television spot and you've got some radio. You're just going to have full integration. Sometimes creators will be on TV, but they'll also be supporting all those campaigns.
Yeah. All right, I think we have time for one question. This is a fun one. What is your take on blogs? Are they still relevant? Are people still reading blogs from companies and brands? Nye, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of lucked out with Lauren in that she has a very active blog and community there, so I took full advantage. But I do think everyone seems to be migrating onto this Substack. We're in this Substack era, which kind of feels like a blog, but it's essentially just a whole bunch of different posts. I feel like that is the realm. I don't see too many people really dedicated to blogs in the way that maybe I don't want to date myself, but like a typical millennial maybe remembers, especially like the gossip blogs. But Substack seems to be a pretty popular alternative. And that leads itself to, more engagement, more interaction, and you can talk to different communities. And then it kind of turns into a forum. And I think that, extends the shelf life of the blog format.
Exactly. Rod, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a return of blogs more as like a central hub. LTK is a central hub for creators, which is more video and entertainment and all the things that creators do. But creators they're starting to do more blogging. And I agree with the last statement that content's being spread all over everything, but that's almost like their thought or focus. They can put that out there and then they can divide it. So I think you'll definitely see some more podcasting, and you'll kind of see what I call micro blogging, which is what Twitter used to call it back in the day. You're just going to see chunks of blog all over the place.
All right. Well, Nye and Rod, thank you again for this great conversation. We really appreciate it. Over to you, Jeremy and Sarah and Jasmine, who's back to take your live questions about TikTok and anything else on the creator economy.
Thank you so much, Minda. We're back and we're rejoined by Jasmine Enberg. Before we get into this, I love that question on blogs, and I'm so glad that I've successfully made the theme of this summit WAGs, Wives and Girlfriends. I see your thumbs down. All right, Jasmine is back with us, and she is here to take your questions on the marketing impact of banning TikTok and anything else on your mind. So please drop more questions in the chat and we'll answer them live. Jasmine, obviously the ban is in limbo right now. TikTok is not available in the App Store, and it's unclear what will happen next. What should creators be doing right now?
It's a big question, one that I get all the time. I think, you can kind of put this into a couple of different buckets, right? First, in terms of like practical advice, in terms of what creators should be doing. I mean, one, download, save your content. I think because we've now realized that, the app can shut down at any moment, right? It can become unaccessible, and you definitely want to be able to have access to your content. To diversify, start testing out new platforms. A lot of TikTok creators already have a presence on other platforms, whether that's Instagram or YouTube. We heard a couple of other platforms mentioned in the last session, like Substack, which are also growing. But really experimenting on these other places. Of course, one of the things I hear from creators all the time is that they're not exactly the same in terms of the technology, in terms of the culture, in terms of the users, which is true. But, starting early, if you haven't diversified already, is a great way to start building your audience and ultimately putting more reliance on these other platforms. I think from a high level perspective, creators should be taking this as a reality check, right? Mm-hmm. Social media is fantastic for distribution, for getting your content out there, but creators like brands on those platforms don't have control over, algorithmic changes in operations to these platforms. So really making sure that you have a diversified strategy, but also one where you have more control and ownership of your audience. And, we heard quite a bit about Substack recently. And I think one of the reasons that is becoming so popular is because creators on those platforms do have a little bit more control over the audience aspect. So I would start there by making sure that you have access to your content and that you are on more than one platform. And actually, I would add to that and say a lot of the brands that I speak to are saying they're still active with TikTok creators, but as they're signing on new creators to work with, they're no longer looking for TikTok-only creators or considering them. They want to make sure that these creators are diversified. And then when I ask them what platform they would like these creators to be on, most of the time, the answer that I get is literally any other platform. Just make sure you have something else. So I would definitely make that kind of the starting point for what creators should be doing right now.
I think when you think about it, and as like a bit of like a wake-up call almost to creators and advertisers, why not diversify, right? It doesn't mean that they necessarily believe that TikTok is not going to be in the market. It's just the fact that you shouldn't necessarily give one platform all the power over you. But then, at the same time, you see, I think what's interesting about TikTok Shop and live commerce, social commerce, TikTok has been so instrumental in growing that in the US that, I mean, what happens to, that whole entire space if TikTok were to go away?
Yeah, we talked about this on the podcast recently, maybe in an episode. No, we talked about this in the podcast recently. Jasmine was on that episode. And this is something that was a big question. If TikTok Shop goes away, a lot of stuff doesn't change. A lot of the content will move other places. Social commerce will continue its growth. But live commerce might really see a stumbling block.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the loss of TikTok would be a big setback for live commerce overall, but I think it also presents a huge opportunity for new platforms to come in. And we've already seen, some social shopping startups really start to take advantage of the volatility. We've seen investors really betting on some of these, like Whatnot, for example. I do think overall, though, the reason that live commerce has worked so well on TikTok is because it's fully integrated into the TikTok ecosystem. You've already got this wide base of users, shoppers, brands, and creators. And I think without that, it's going to be really hard to transfer that behavior to other platforms. But, I think we're going to see a lot of competition and among these platforms for merchants, for shoppers. But live commerce is really a big open question for me in terms of what happens if TikTok goes away.
Yeah, I got to put you on the spot because that's fun.
That's what we've been doing this whole time.
Yeah, so
No, I was like, what?
but no. But which platforms stand to benefit the most if TikTok exits the market? Like I was looking at some data that said Instagram. I think that there's people who say like, well, YouTube Shorts obviously is a big opportunity. I know you published a report for clients pretty recently on this very topic. So what say you?
So I think ultimately Meta and YouTube will be the biggest financial beneficiaries of a TikTok ban or if TikTok no longer operates in the US. We did see during the brief shutdown advertisers moving more of their spending to platforms like Pinterest, which could also be beneficiaries. I could see Snapchat benefiting. We heard a little bit about that in its Q4 earnings last week too, about how it's already benefiting from some of this volatility. But overall, I think Meta and YouTube, biggest beneficiaries, but there is this long list of other platforms that stand to benefit. And I think that even goes beyond social media into platforms like CTV and retail media, just because TikTok touches so many different aspects of our lives. From the creator angle, it's been really interesting because there's a lot of conflicting research in terms of where creators would migrate to. I think, a lot of TikTok creators have been encouraging their audiences to follow them to YouTube and to Instagram, and those tend to be the top two platforms we see in the data as well. But I wrote about some of this, and it depends on what you're asking them, right? So there was some data from one research company that asked creators, what platform is the best alternative for building an audience? And Instagram was at the top of the list. But then when you asked overall, and it was another research firm, overall, what is the best alternative for TikTok? YouTube was number one. And so I think creators are really split in terms of where they're going to go. They're going to experiment on multiple different platforms. Again, though, with Meta's platforms, Instagram in particular, and YouTube kind of rising to the very top.
Jasmine,
no, sorry, you first.
Jasmine, I talked to someone pretty recently about who mentioned, someone from an agency mentioned to me about how different age groups might be migrating different places. So the person I talked to said that he thinks that younger people will migrate to YouTube, older people will migrate to Instagram. Do you feel like there's any that resonates with you?
I mean, every time I talk to Gen Z or younger, what I hear is I will absolutely never go to Instagram. I do think we'll probably see more of them shift toward shorts. I think for them, TikTok is more of an entertainment channel. I think for most people, TikTok is more of an entertainment channel, and YouTube is, more entertainment focused than Instagram is in many ways. But I don't necessarily think it's a winner takes all scenario here. I mean, I think people would like to say they would never go to Instagram Reels, but the reality is if their favorite creators and their friends and the brands that they interact and engage with are on Reels, they're going to be there too. So yes, I mean, I do think we could see some differences based on different demographics, particularly age, but I do think, overall we'll see kind of diversification across multiple different platforms within these age groups.
Yeah, we got a comment that says, I think YouTube is great, but not all creators will successfully transition to YouTube. So it's not just the viewers, it's the creators who might not be able to grasp that long form content as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that TikTok had been pushing already, for the past couple of years is really longer form content on TikTok. And, speaking to a lot of the creators, TikTok creators, I mean, they had trouble transitioning from short form into longer form. And then you've got that added aspect of your audience may not be on YouTube. And so it isn't just an easy switch. They can't just all of a sudden transfer to another platform. I think YouTube Shorts is an easier entry point for a lot of TikTok creators. And we've seen YouTube really try to make that a more attractive place as a result of all this volatility and turmoil.
I think, Sarah, I think you wrote about it, or maybe I did. It's been a lot the last month or so, but Meta's cash incentives, right? I mean, I don't know if that comes across, Jasmine, your opinion, as like a little too thirsty in terms of a way to get creators to post reels. What's your take?
It's very thirsty, but I also think the best way to get creators to your platform is by offering them money, right? I mean, I think the question then becomes, do they stay?
Yeah.
And they will stay if their audience is there and if they can find a sustainable way to earn an income. So yes, I mean, why not test it out if you get a cash incentive for doing so, but it's that sustainability that remains to be seen.
I think that ties in really well to a question we just got, which is, what changes do you think Instagram could make to attract younger demographics?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we heard on Meta's earnings call was, well, not necessarily about Instagram, but about making Facebook more attractive to younger people. Zuckerberg talked a lot about, how he wants to go back to OG Facebook, and a lot of that has to do with their issues with attracting young people to the platform. I think one of the things that younger social users really are looking for, and Rod from LTK talked about this in the last session, is more of that social networking experience that has been kind of lost as social platforms have become more media focused and more entertainment channels. So I think focusing on those more social aspects, including connections in smaller, more intimate circles, is something that Instagram could certainly do to attract more younger people. And it's been working on that. I mean, there's been a really heavy emphasis on DMs, for example. You have limited stories, you have limited feeds, and really finding ways to kind of speak to that, OG kind of social experience that we had 15 years ago on.
Yeah, that's a real pendulum swing, because Facebook, Instagram that's the place that the algorithmic feed sort of was popularized. So definitely swinging back.
But Jasmine, also building on that, it's interesting because I think that some of these organic things that even Minda was talking about in her panel, some of those are on Meta. And we had a comment, somebody who was suggesting to their clients to be, just somewhat concerned about their media budget. How much should they allocate to Meta, as they're going the way of Twitter and X, becoming an issue of brand trust and credibility. And that's tied to the recent content moderation announcements. I mean, I will personally say, I think that this is like, let's just see what actually happens, because Meta has a vested interest to make sure that it doesn't become a free-for-all to some degree. I mean, ultimately, it's a for-profit business. It's a very successful advertising business in a way that X didn't really ever achieve. So what's your take? Do you think that this is something that it is going to become very brand unsafe, and that you might not want to necessarily allocate media budgets in that direction?
I think you're absolutely right in saying that this is kind of a wait and see moment. We don't really know how all of this is going to play out and what ultimately these policy changes are going to mean for content on the platform. I think it's right for brands and advertisers to be questioning these changes. But again, I don't think it necessarily means any big shifts in budget right now. I mean, Meta's platforms are such essential advertising platforms for so many brands. They have such massive scale and such powerful tools that it's going to be really difficult for many of them to pull the plug the way that they did on Twitter or on X. So I think just waiting and seeing how all of this plays out is probably the best advice I can give right now. I think the other thing that might make advertisers more comfortable about Meta's content moderation changes when you compare them to X is, according to reports, Meta won't be allowing the community notes on ads, which has been a big problem for a lot of advertisers on X, for example.
Jasmine, I have one more question from the audience related to definitions. This person said, I would love to hear your opinion on what differentiates a content creator from an influencer. There are too many differing views currently in the industry.
There are a lot of differing views. I think one of the biggest challenges with the creator economy and covering and researching the creator economy is the lack of standard definitions. The way that we differentiate between creators and influencers at eMarketer is this. So creators are individuals or entities who develop content for digital platforms with the intention of building an audience and monetizing. Influencers are anyone who has the ability to sway the purchasing decisions and the brand loyalty of a broader population. Influencers are content creators if they are developing content, and then creators are influencers if they are then influencing or swaying people's purchasing decisions. I think that's kind of the overlap.
Okay, so we've got a real blurry line there, but it centers around commerce.
Yes, I mean, I think for me, what it centers around is content creation. If you are creating content and the intent of that content creation is to build an audience and monetize, I would count that person as a content creator.
Makes sense. How about I mean we covered a lot today, right? So I'm saying like we get all
We covered very little. You guys covered a lot.
We've been just taking
You've
notes.
been great hosts.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know I promised you $20 for saying that. What was your favorite trend, Jasmine, from this morning, or any major takeaways during this whole entire summit?
So one of the things that I keep coming back to, there's a lot of them, but one of the things I keep coming back to is something that Nye said on Minda's panel about shareability. I think it was because it goes back to what we talked about too, in terms of, people wanting to communicate maybe in more private spaces on social media, but also this idea that social is now such a huge defining aspect of our lives, whether we're on the platforms or off of them, right? And so we want that content to travel with us, regardless of what we're doing. And so I think shareability has become this really important metric for a lot of marketers. And it also makes sense. And I think about my own social behavior too. I send a lot of reels and TikToks in DMs and post much less frequently than I used to. And so we're certainly seeing that play out. And I think it's just such an important trend to keep in mind, but also a good metric for marketers when they're looking to measure the success of their creator campaigns.
Jasmine, what kind of Reels content are you sending?
So I have recently rediscovered Heartthrob Anderson. I don't know if you know him.
So good. Oh my God.
Tell me.
So good.
He is so good. I used to watch his content all the time, and he popped up back in my Instagram feed recently, and I've been going through a lot of his old videos and sending them. But he reviews 90s movies and TV shows. What I love him for are his reviews of Seventh Heaven. He's really great. I would check him out.
He reviews the Bernstein Bear books, and that is just like, do not be eating anything as you're watching that.
Jeremy, what was your big takeaway or big theme from the day?
Oh my God. Well, so much, but I mean, I think one of the big things is just how creators and celebrities are really converging, and creators, which was like a social media phenomenon, is really going to be everywhere. Like you'll see out-of-home advertising. You're going to see CTV spots featuring them, so it's just going to be nonstop.
Yeah, definitely.
How about you?
Something that I wasn't, I think, expecting to hear so much, but then heard a lot about was the benefit of smaller channels that we don't think about as much. There's a lot of, should I be moving to YouTube? Should I be moving to Instagram? I liked hearing about Reddit, about Pinterest, about Snapchat, and about Substack and Beehive were both also mentioned by some of our creators. So I think it's really interesting. Like there's not a playbook of move into this space necessarily, but do what works for you as a creator. Go to the place your audience might follow you. For Maxine the Corgi, that was Beehive. For someone else, a newsletter might not be the best option, but make sure to have an owned and operated channel of some sort. Reddit especially. Love that we kept talking about that because they're right. It is a lot of Reddit being picked up on Google recently.
And Jasmine, this was such a great conversation. I wish I had time for your predictions on exactly what happens at the end of that 75 day period that's been extended. So maybe people should just follow us on social or subscribe to get the answer to that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't have time to get your take on WAGs. But you know who did have a take on WAGs? Maxine the corgi when she wagged that tail.
I love how
Okay, they're telling me we have to wrap up because I said that. That was so much fun. It is all we have time for today. Thank you again to all our wonderful analysts and our guest who shared their insights with all of us. A big thank you also to our production crew behind the scenes for all of their hard work. They're the true creators.
And also you, thank you so much at home, at the office, wherever, for spending part of your Friday with us. I want to remind you that all of today's sessions are already available on demand. Watch them again or share them with your colleagues or both. And
Keep watching the reruns.
Absolutely. Do not swipe. If you enjoyed today, we've got more events just like this one in store for you coming up this year. In May, we'll be diving into commerce media. Check out the resources tab or the announcement pop-up on your screen for a link to find out more about our eMarketer Summit series. Let me just take a quick moment to tell you what else we have going on. Visit emarketer.com to register for upcoming live webinars and sign up for our newsletters. Don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast, which you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts, and you can spend time with Sarah on the Wednesday episodes. And if you're not already a subscriber, that's okay. We forgive you. Just visit our website to learn more about Pro Plus and the insights your team can start using now.
Thank you again for joining us today. Have a great weekend, a great Super Bowl.